When this drowning woman dialed 911 for help, the operator's reaction was shocking. But before we start, please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to WonderBot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. Deborah Stevens needs help, and quickly. A flash flood has enveloped her car in water and she can't immediately see a way out. So Stevens naturally decides to dial 911 to ask for assistance. On the other end of the line though, dispatcher Donna Reneau answers the phone. And while Reneau tries to aid Stevens, the responder also delivers a seemingly chilling response to the caller's desperate cries for help. So how did Stevens find herself in this mess? Well, rather than stay home during bad weather, Stevens had opted to hit the road. She worked a paper route in that area of Fort Smith, Arkansas, you see. This meant that she often drove around in the dark during the early morning hours. When Stevens called 911 during the flooding incident, in fact, it was 4:38 a.m. She even told Reneau that she hadn't seen that the road ahead had flooded with water before it was too late. Such a situation would be enough to make anyone panic, so it's no surprise that you can hear Stevens' desperation through her recorded 911 call. And the stranded worker remained on the line for 22 painful minutes as Reneau worked with her on the other end of the line. But the dispatcher seemingly didn't do so in a way that you might expect for someone in her position. In fact, many people who listened to the audio of Stevens' life-or-death phone call couldn't believe what they were hearing. The recording made plain the disturbing sentiments that had come straight from Reneau's mouth. The woman, whose job it was to save Stevens from the flood, had some people questioning if she'd done more harm than good. Those who knew Deborah Stevens described her to the Southwest Times Record with a slew of warm and positive adjectives. Some called her loving and kind, while others labeled her gentle and committed. Some interviewees considered her a best friend. Others knew her as a hard-working employee and co-worker. Fort Smith, Arkansas, painted the backdrop for much of Stevens' life. She was born there, and she attended high school and community college within the city limits. Her husband Marcus had also grown up there, and she and her mom Nancy taught preschoolers at a Baptist church in Fort Smith too. Of course, that was just one way that Stevens wove her way into the Fort Smith community. For instance, City Director Neil Martin recalled that she had campaigned hard for him to earn his position. Every day for an entire month, she handed out flyers, leaving Martin in disbelief of the dedication she'd shown to him in his work. Martin went on to say, Stevens was a model of being a servant, doing what God called her to do, and serving her community and friends. If people were willing to give of themselves like she did, I think our city, our state, and our country would be a lot better. LaTanya Stoltz, who knew the 47-year-old Stevens for 4 decades, noted that her friend treated her work with diligence and care. Stoltz said, she was a hard-working woman who was very dedicated to her job. As a newspaper delivery woman for the Southwest Times Record, Stoltz said she would deliver in the snow and ice when almost no one else would. Stoltz went on to say that Stevens was committed to pleasing others. Indeed, Stoltz experienced this aspect of her personality during a 4-decade-long friendship with Stevens. The women grew up going to church trips together, and as adults they switched to dinners. On occasion, they'd apparently laugh and talk for hours. Sadly, however, Stevens would find herself involved in a conversation with a much different tone on the morning of August 24, 2019. Before dawn, the ever-dedicated delivery woman hit the road to ensure those on her route received their morning papers. But weather conditions quickly became dangerous, and Stevens found herself in the midst of a flash flood. Flash floods tend to inundate low-lying areas, such as dried-out lakes, depressions, or rivers. In many cases, a flash flood arises in tandem with heavy rainfall, whether it be from a hurricane, thunderstorm, or even snowstorm meltwater. In Fort Smith on August 24th, more than 4 inches of rain fell to trigger flooding. In the case of a flash flood, the United States National Weather Service issues some simple advice. Turn around, don't drown. That's because water might well rise suddenly and powerfully. Indeed, what appears to be a passable stream could end up sweeping away a car and the passengers contained within. In Stevens' case, the flash flood appeared so suddenly that she didn't see the water on the road ahead of her. So she drove up to it, but quickly found it creeping up to her chest level. Panicked, she initially phoned her mother-in-law, who had also gone out that morning to deliver papers. Then Stevens called 911, but help wouldn't reach her in time. Instead, the 47-year-old's gray Mazda CX-9 got swept away in the dangerous floodwaters. The dispatcher on the other end of the line was Donna Reneau. She spent 22 minutes on the phone with Stevens, but couldn't get first responders to her in time. Reneau had repeatedly spent the previous 5 years of her life working as a dispatcher in Fort Smith, and it seemed as though she had excelled in the job too. In February of 2019, the city's police department named her the Fire Dispatcher of the Year after a half-decade of service. Interim Fort Smith Police Chief Danny Baker provided a written statement after Stevens' fateful call to Reneau. He described how the dispatcher had climbed the ranks and was permitted to train new recruits in the role. However, Reneau had recently decided to leave her post with the city's dispatch. In fact, by the time Reneau answered Stevens' call, she'd already given in her fourth night's notice. That time period had now come to a close, with the woman clocking in for her last shift on August 24, 2019. As it turned out, Reneau's conversation with the preschool teacher would be the last one she'd ever have on the job. As Baker put it, Reneau had served her post well. He said she was a good, decent human being who had saved countless lives in the past 5 years. But that likely wouldn't be what people would remember Reneau for. He told ABC News, "It's so unfortunate that her entire career will be defined by this single incident." Indeed, the morning of the flash flood had pushed the Fort Smith Police Department to its limits. They only had 4 people on hand to answer 7 emergency lines. And those dispatchers only had 9 police officers on the ground who could help the flood victims whose calls started pouring in. To make matters worse, when Stevens called into the 911 dispatch, she had no precise idea where she was. This made Reneau's job, sending first responders to the scene to help her, a difficult task. And it proved to be one of the reasons why the frantic driver and the busy dispatcher remained on the phone for a grueling 22 minutes. A recording of the phone call captures Stevens' initial description of her situation. "I turned off the road while I was doing my newspapers and I'm flooded over here," she reports to Reneau in a relatively calm voice. "It's all the way up to my windows and I can't get out and I'm scared to death, ma'am." As Stevens begs for help for the first time, Reneau responds in a tone that she presumably wants the caller to mirror. She says softly, "I need you to calm down. I need you to tell me where you are." Stevens can't provide an answer to that question though. She replies, "I don't know, ma'am." Although Stevens' tone ticks slightly toward frantic, Reneau keeps it cool. She asks the caller what kind of car she's driving to help first responders identify it. Stevens responds with additional information. "It's a gray SUV and the water's all the way up to my window, and it's coming in my windows. I mean, I'm floating in water right now, ma'am," she says. At this point, Stevens begins what will become a more than 20-minute panic as she faces death. She says, "Please help me, I don't want to die." Reneau calmly responds, "You're not going to die. Hold on for a second." Then Stevens explains how she got into such a dire spot in the first place. Stevens says, "I'm sorry, I couldn't see the water when I came up on it, ma'am. It just all of a sudden hit me." But Reneau pays little mind to Stevens' panic. Instead, she says, "You say you're in a gray van?" This isn't what Stevens had said earlier, and she repeats it all. "I'm in a gray SUV, a Mazda CX-9, she says. The conversation begins to digress as Stevens becomes more and more terrified of the rising waters enveloping her. She repeats that she fears death looms over her in her flooded SUV. The newspaper delivery woman cries and asks when help will come for her. She tells Reneau she doesn't know how to swim. As the minutes pass, Reneau's patience seems to wear thin. She eventually replies, "You're not going to die. I don't know why you're freaking out. You freaking out is doing nothing but losing your oxygen in there. So calm down." The dispatcher's words continue to come out in a callous manner. Indeed, Stevens continues to repeat herself while on the line with Reneau. She apologizes once more for not seeing the floodwaters ahead of her, and this time the dispatcher has a response. Reneau says, "I don't see how you didn't see it. You had to go right over it." Stevens then reports to Reneau that she can see people watching her from the balconies of an apartment building nearby. She wonders why no one stepped out to help her. Reneau retorts, "They're not going to get themselves in danger because you put yourself in danger." The dispatcher does, however, report that some bystanders have called in to report Stevens' situation at least. Also during the conversation, Stevens tells Reneau that she fears she has to vomit. In a non-reassuring fashion, the dispatcher replies, "Well, you're in the water, you can throw up, it's not going to matter." But nothing can deter Stevens from seeking support from and showing respect to Reneau. Stevens first asks Reneau to join her in prayer, which the dispatcher obliges. The newspaper delivery woman says, "Please help me and get me out of this water, dear Father." With that prayer comes yet another apology for putting herself in a dangerous situation. And this time, Reneau can't help but respond curtly. Reneau coldly retorts to Stevens, "This will teach you next time you don't drive in the water." But as the phone call goes on, it seems that other Fort Smith residents have phoned in too. The recording captures Reneau on the line with more people attempting to balance all the calls. But the water continues to rise, inspiring Stevens to share more of her fears with Reneau. She worries that the water surrounding her will destroy her new phone, and Reneau has yet another harsh response at the ready. She says, "You're over there crying for your life. Who cares about your phone?" Eventually, though, the phone call comes to a heartbreaking end. Reneau attempts to get first responders to Stevens' location while she cries on the phone. The dispatcher tells the firefighters, "I'm on the phone with her, she's freaking out." And if the audio recording heard that, then maybe Stevens did too. Things get worse when firefighters find themselves unable to locate Stevens. She hears them say so and starts to bawl. This prompts Reneau to say, "Miss Debbie, you're going to have to shut up." She then asks the preschool teacher to honk her car horn so firefighters can find her, but it doesn't work. Stevens says, "Everything's dead." In a final moment of panic, Stevens screams as her SUV starts sliding with the floodwaters. She shrieks, "I'm going to die." Reneau says, "Miss Debbie, you're breathing just fine because you're screaming at me. So calm down. I know you're scared. Hold on for me." But Stevens can't hold on any longer. Instead, Reneau continues to call out for Stevens as the line goes silent. Reneau says, "She sounds like she's underwater now." At 5 a.m., the call ends. Nearly an hour later, first responders finally find Stevens' SUV. They try reviving her, but she'd drowned in the sudden flood. In the aftermath of the floods, the audio of Stevens' phone call hit the public airwaves. That's when it became clear that people were outraged at Reneau's cruel treatment of the woman. But the Fort Smith police defended their dispatcher. They said in a statement, "While the operator's response to this extremely tense and dynamic event sounds calloused and uncaring at times, sincere efforts were being made to locate and save Mrs. Stevens." Police Chief Baker and the rest of the Fort Smith Department apparently felt devastated by the loss too. He said in a statement, "For every one of us, saving lives is at the very core of who we are and why we do what we do. When we're unsuccessful, it hurts."